Dr. Albert Palazzo is the director of the Australian Army's War Research Center. His PhD is from The Ohio State University, and his thesis was published as Seeking Victory on the Western Front, the British Army and Chemical Warfare in World War I. He has published widely on the history of the Australian Army and the contemporary character of war. His major works include The Australian Army, a history of its organization from 1901 to 2001, Moltke to Bin Laden, The Relevance of Doctrine in Contemporary Military Environment, and the Australian Army in Vietnam, The Future of War Debate in Australia, and Forging Australian Land Power, a primer. His current research is on the effect of resource limits and climate change on the future character of war and technological advances and the rising superiority of the defense. Please welcome Dr. Palazzo.
Hi, hello everybody. Now, before I begin, despite this very official slide, I do have to say that the views that I'm about to express are my own and not necessarily those of the Australian Army or the Department of Defense or the Australian government. I should also say that I'm going to go old school on you. I brought with me 2 slides. This is number 1. And number 2 just says questions. So I have a little paper here that I'll try to convey to you. So yes, I'm going to be talking about precision, and I don't think this is on. It's working? Okay. So I'm going to be talking about precision and the consequences for the modern battlefield. Let me just begin in my introduction that and some of this will be known to most of you. But it's sort of an essential foundation for where I'm going to be going. But the effectiveness of precision weapons at striking targets has been repeatedly demonstrated in recent years. It's no longer remarkable that a missile or a shell fired from a considerable distance or a bomb released from a great height can hit a target with only a minuscule margin of error. Precision munitions are now even available for what would formerly have been classified as area weapons, such as mortars, and are beginning to emerge for small arms. Artillery precision rounds have also entered service and are converting the gun from a saturation weapon to a one-shot, one-kill weapon. We are approaching the point that on today's battlefield, if it can be sensed, it can be killed from afar, often with a single round. And as the level of precision improves, this will only become more true. To date, only a few countries have demonstrated precision capability in war. Typically, precision has been the remit of the United States and its coalition partners, or a few other countries, such as Israel. Other countries, and even non-state actors, do have precision capability to varying degrees, some significant, but little or no experience in its employment in war. In recent wars, therefore, the application of precision weapons has largely been a one-sided affair. This happy condition is unlikely to last. These weapons are proliferating, and a future may not be too far off in which war is waged between 2 adversaries who both field a robust precision capability. For Israel, this is already becoming a reality, albeit a limited one. China's rise has been marked by its investment in precision technologies as it fields weapons aimed at denying access to its maritime approaches. Other countries are making similar investments, although not on the same scale. This paper presumes that the art of war is on the cusp of what McGregor, Knox, and Williams and Murray have defined as a revolution in military affairs. Now, I use this term with some hesitation due to the exaggerated predictions of the RMA of the 1990s. But it's still a valid term that does describe these kinds of major changes that happen in the character of war. The Precision RMA offers the opportunity for states and even substates to establish wide anti-access envelopes that will prevent an adversary from closing with their territory, or at least doing so only at a high or even mission-defeating cost. the effect of the proliferation of precision weapons will be profound and far-reaching. At the tactical level, the rise of precision threatens to shift the balance between the attacker and the defender decisively in the direction of the defense, with the result being the denial of the offense's ability to maneuver, close, and force a decision. However, the precision RMA promises also far more reaching effects. These will necessitate a reevaluation of the entire character of war, particularly the balance between the traditional domains of war, as well as having implications for the structure and organization of land, sea, and air forces. The time has therefore come for being from Australia, I'm going to say the Australian and US armies and our allies to think through the implications of precision at the level of more than just improving the ability to kill, and to grapple with a character of war that may be distinctly different from that of today. So I'm going to switch now and talk about what you can call the killing zone. There is some urgency for the Australian and US armies to think more deeply on this dramatic shift in the character of war that precision weapons offer. The US and its allies have, to date, largely used precision as a means to improve the effectiveness of existing ways of placing a kinetic effect on a target, that is, killing, particularly of high-value targets. The US and its allies have not consciously attempted to launch a precision RMA. Other states, however, are doing just that. Instead of seeking only better tactical effects, they are using precision to create effects that encompass the strategic and operational levels of war. The primary effect sought is area denial and its related expression, anti-access. Modern long-range weapons offer the defense the opportunity to create killing zones measured not in meters or kilometers, but in thousands of kilometers. Barry Watts has described these as no-go zones, areas that would be too difficult or costly to project power across, with the results being a balkanization of the world. This is not the first time that advances in military technology have allowed the establishment of such zones that favor the defender. The second half of the 19th century saw the introduction of a number of weapons that allowed a defender to create lethal, fire-beating zone in front of their positions with a depth that would eventually reach several kilometers. These weapons included breech-loading rifles and artillery, quick-firing guns, machine guns, smokeless power. Those of you that have visited Spotsylvania in Virginia will understand what I mean. But what emerged in 1864 has accelerated, and what emerged in 1864 accelerated over the next 50 years. The stalemate and slaughter of tens of thousands of soldiers on the Western Front was a result of this evolution in this defensive zone. So let me explain what I mean by this evolution of the dimensions of war. Today's precision anti-access weapons have immense ranges. Some missiles can hit targets thousands of kilometers from launch. More significantly, they can also reach out over the maritime domain. China already deploys missiles that can strike beyond the first island chain, bringing within range the US bases in Okinawa. Thus, what began as a problem primarily of tactics is now also one of operations and strategy. I believe what is happening is what I've identified elsewhere as a compression of the dimensions of war. As range, accuracy, and lethality increase, the importance of distance decreases, since these weapons remain effective over very long distances. Turning to Australia for a moment, this will prove particularly significant, such as a pair of RAND researchers wrote, Dudzinski and Digby were their names. They observed that remoteness from threat for Australia is no longer a standing factor in defense policy. Now, Australia, and Australians know this, is one of the safest countries in the world, but its security is not based upon its military strength. It's based upon it being a real pain to get to. And so these authors, Dudzinski and Digby, were writing in 1976, and the concern was missile-borne nuclear bombs. But a further observation that can now be made is that the land, sea, and air domains will merge to become one as long-range, land-based precision weapons achieve dominance over the sea and the air. As humanity is a terrestrial species, the primacy of the land will only be further enhanced. The significance of this is that command of the sea, for example, will no longer be a function of being the dominant naval power in a region. Instead, the prerequisite for command of the sea will be command of the land. If navies are to maneuver in waters overwatched by anti-access weapons, they can only do so if friendly forces control both their own territory and also dominate the land of their adversary. Having the ability to exert dominance over the land on both sides of a body of water will be the prerequisite for command of the sea. The fate of warships sailing into waters overwatched by anti-access weapons is likely to be what was described by Wayne P. Hughes in Fleet Tactics and Coastal Command and Henry Hendricks in At What Cost a Carrier, that is, destruction. Hughes goes on to update the old truism. A ship's a fool to fight a fort, meaning the fort usually wins. The fort is a stable platform, has greater resiliency, and should have a greater depth of munitions than a ship. A fort is also persistent, whereas a ship's duration on station is not. Moreover, with modern anti-access weapons, the fort is no longer a cannon-armed static redoubt guarding the entry to a harbor or the passage of a narrow strait. Instead is masses of missile batteries, most likely mobile ones, swarms of unmanned small boats and submersible vessels, and remotely piloted aircraft. The significance of the development is just as great for land forces as it is for navies, particularly if armies are required to protect power into or across the maritime domain. So what I think is the way ahead. It is useful to think of the relationship between the offense and the defense as a pendulum whose undisturbed state is one of relative balance or neutrality. When the pendulum is in a neutral setting, the available technology, the means of the implementation, and the condition of training, morale, and all those other factors that go into military effectiveness, it means that neither the offense nor the defense has a significant advantage. The relationship between the offense and the defense is one of symmetry. For example, if you were a soldier in the Napoleonic Wars, there would be very little difference between your weapons and those of your opponents. They basically were armed and equipped with the same things. In the internal struggle between adversaries for advantage over each other, the pendulum does frequently move in either direction. But rarely does it shift very far, and when it does, it usually not for very long. An innovative military force that gains an asymmetric advantage invariably unleashes urgency for adaptation by its opponents, and its initial advantage is neutralized or even bettered. For example, the appearance of the bronze mace gave its wielder a decisive advantage over opponents still armed with the stone one. The advantage was temporary, however, as bronze maces proliferated and replaced inferior designs. Sometimes the pendulum is pushed a bit further. In 1939, the German army demonstrated its superior understanding of mechanized warfare, which gave its forces an offensive advantage, albeit temporarily, until its opponents adjusted. Today's precision weapons offer an even more dramatic swing, but this time in a direction favoring the defense. A swing that may prove even greater than one which occurred during the late 19th century and reached its apogee on the Western Front. For the United States and the Australian Army, as well as for our allies, it is critical that the balance be returned to a more neutral setting. Being able to restore mobility to war is critical, because without maneuver, war risks becoming static and indecisive. The utility of war may lessen. It may also become a war of exhaustion, with all the potential for a long struggle. But to permit maneuver, the killing zone will need to be controlled. Achieving maneuver in a space dominated by anti-access weapons is on one level a question of tactical adaptation. During the First World War, the stalemate of the trenches was overcome and mobility restored. Each side invented new weapons and incorporated new ideas about how to organize and integrate their forces, with the goal of restoring maneuver and hence decision. For the British and French, this was a process of identifying and coordinating the means to neutralize the defensive firepower that dominated no man's land. The key breakthrough was not the tank, as some of you may imagine, although the tank was important. Rather, it was the establishment of an organization called the Counter-Battery Staff Office, modern war's first intelligence fusion and command center. Through better identification of targets, combined with technical advances in gunnery accuracy, the British and French were able to employ their own fire assets to neutralize German ones and thereby remove the enemy's defensive fire from battle. For discrete periods of time and at places of their choosing, the British and French were able to restore maneuver. The Counter-Battery Staff Office was the key to the Battle of Amiens of the 8th of August, 1918, which Ludendorff was to call the blackest day of the German army. While successful maneuver was restored, it was still at a very high cost, and the Western Front remained a highly lethal environment until the armistice. While the British and French had shifted the pendulum back into a neutral setting, they were unable to push it far enough to give them a decisive advantage. That required the maturing of mechanization warfare in the interwar period. The United States and its allies must do more than simply restore the ability of their forces to maneuver in zones that their adversary wishes to deny them. In other words, they must aspire to achieve more than the restoration of the balance between the offense and defense. While it is possible to employ their own precision weapons and sensors to neutralize an adversary's systems and thereby achieve maneuver, that is an achievement solely of tactical value. Instead, the United States and its allies must innovate in ways that achieve more than just enhanced strike ability. Other assets such as cyber and social media must also become elements of distant strike. They must strive to create an asymmetric advantage for the offense. They must seek opportunities for precision, as well as for the deployment of other emerging weapons and systems that also provide advantage in the operational and strategic domains. This coming of precision also requires a reassessment of the balance between the three traditional domains of war: the land, the sea, and the air. As the ranges of precision weapons increase, and as those of other new technologies also increase, for example, cyber's reach is global, the relevance of distance will continue to decrease. This will have a profound effect on the mission and organizations of fleets and air arms. Ships will no longer need to fight other ships for sea control. Instead, sea control will be achieved by land-based precision strike. The same can be said for the attainment of air superiority. Navy and Air Forces are not going to disappear as a result of the change in this relationship between the domains of war, but their purpose will need to change. In a precision future, the prerequisite task for ships may become that of transport enlargement of a land force, its sustainment ashore, and the provision of supporting fire, not battle against other ships. For air forces, the missions of transport and close air support, perhaps not air superiority, will move to the fore. For example, when the air domain was first militarized, the primary purpose of aircraft was observation in support of ground forces. Soon interceptors appeared in the air, and the primary mission became air superiority first, in order so that these observer planes could survive. There's no reason to expect that this will remain the case, and to do so is a very linear approach to the very chaotic activity which is war. These will be difficult adjustments for these other services to accept, because they strike at the heart of what it means to be a sailor, airman, or airwoman. But they still will need to be addressed. I don't believe they're avoidable. So to bring this all together, to conclude, the appearance of aircraft in naval warfare redefined not only naval tactics, but also the whole strategy of naval war. So we've been here before. For battleship admirals, this was a traumatic transition, whose reality was confirmed at Toronto and Pearl Harbor. For the land force, the move from mounted to armored forces was also a cultural shock of similar magnitude. This is a process that that needs to be considered today because of precision weapons. In Sea Power and American interests in the Western Pacific, David Gompert concluded that it no longer takes a carrier to sink a carrier. Like all technologies, precision weapons offers both risks and rewards. Whether one achieves the benefits of the rewards of an innovation or one is deterred by the risks is not a matter of the technology, but the agency of the human brain in coming to understand the opportunities offered and the willingness to overcome institutional reluctance and cultural impediment. The effects of the precision RMA can be far-reaching. The initial challenge facing the United States, Australia, and their allies is to overcome the advantage that potential adversaries have gained through the implementation of anti-access systems, and thereby restore the balance between the offense and the defense. But I would say that that's not enough. Precision promises, or perhaps requires, a rethinking of the entire character of war, particularly the relationship between the domains of war. The United States allies and Australia and their allies need to think through all the implication of precision, not just to use it to improve targeting and the effectiveness of killing. They must see its potential effects on the entire character of war. As a military historian, I don't look for trends when thinking about the future. As a historian, I look for echoes of the past as they go forward into the future. And at the moment, I would estimate that we're at roughly 1880. Now, the commanders of the European armies, the American armies, back in 1880, they recognized what these new technologies were doing in the art of war. And they recognized the emergency of a wider and wider killing zone. But recognizing it, they were still unable to actually figure out how to overcome it and to restore mobility, restore maneuver. And it took the carnage of the Western Front to finally bring that restoration back. I hope that we're able to do better. Thank you for your time. And we'll open the floor to questions. Need mics down here?
You didn't show us your other slide.
Oh, how do we go to the other slide? There we go.
I'm curious your views on the role of counter-precision, the Chinese bodyguard system, Sky Shield, Sky Guard by the Swiss Oerlikon Corporation, camouflage cover deception, all those things that there's a whole industry, if you will, to counter precision weapons, GPS jamming and so on. So how do you see that developing as a counter?
Well, essentially that is all part of that eternal struggle between the emergence of new weapons and the struggle to find ways to counter them. So these things will continue and continue to appear. Will they have, or to the extent of the effect that they will have on the potential character of war that I've suggested? And of course, this is only a suggestion. I'm aware that people will come up with countermeasures. I don't know, how effective they will be, because we don't know this. But I would suggest that there's opportunity here to recraft, and I think that's part of my point here, is to take opportunity to recraft a new way of thinking about war and how one organizes and prepares for it, that can provide one's military organization with greater utility and greater effectiveness. And as a part of that, of course, then there'll have to be counter technologies. But what I'm trying to really suggest here is that we should start to be thinking a lot bigger than just using these weapons as a means to carry out targeted killing. We should see them as an opportunity, maybe, to create an entirely different way, a different approach.
So Mr. Phillips totally stole my question as a SIGMAN guy. I was going to ask the same thing, but I had a backup question.
Excellent.
So it appears that Russia may have taken directly the opposite approach with multiple launch rocket systems, where the problem with precision weapons, at least today, is they're extremely expensive. And when you look at the cost factor, it's cheaper, especially if you're a bad guy, to just launch a whole bunch of something cheap to knock out the targets and not even go particularly precision. Any thoughts on that?
I like your use of the word bad guy. They might have a different opinion on that. In part, I guess it depends on what you're trying to do. They're using these weapon systems against their neighbors, and it's also, I guess, if you look at the history or the traditions of the Russian army, using massed firepower is within their cultural norm. So they're simply responding to their way of war, and they've perhaps optimized that more, or in their particular circumstances still feel that that is a very legitimate and a very effective way to go about what they want to achieve. And that's perfectly fine. But you have to ask the question, what we're trying to achieve, or the situations that we might face, do we need something else? And with the cost of precision, you're saying that yes, these are fairly expensive systems, but the reality is that they're not, compared to let's say when one of the things I mentioned, Goldberg's book on warfare in the Pacific. The average carrier, I don't know, $8 billion. Missile, $1.5 million or $2 million. So that's an economic ratio which cannot, very much favors the precision missile than a different weapon system, and that's an economic contest that you really can't win. And plus, one has to assume that these things are going to get cheaper and cheaper, and as they get cheaper, they're going to proliferate into places, countries that don't currently use them.
Yeah, so a follow-up question then, in terms of precision weapons. Recently, a couple of folks here in the United States put the shotgun on a UAV, so it brings a whole new meaning to precision. So for 9/11 type attacks, for the San Bernardino type attacks, Paris attacks, one can actually have far standoff with extreme precision and cause extreme chaos. What's your thoughts on that level of tactical precision?
Yeah, I'm sort of surprised nobody has, done that, for real, in a very nasty way, or putting a bit of C4 onto something and flying into something. Yeah, I think that's a reality that should be, I'm surprised, yes, that it hasn't already occurred. Yeah, I think we can expect that, and we can, initially various groups that right now can't afford higher-end systems or don't want to participate with that kind of challenge will embrace these things. So, no, I absolutely expect that. Oh.
Okay, Dr. Palazzo, thanks very much. Thank you, General. Appreciate your presentation. I'd like to again proclaim that you are now a mad scientist. Thank you very much, sir, and your magic coffee cup. Thank you.